Hi everyone, welcome back to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel, promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. So this is Contemplations on Conflict number 4, where I want to look at something said by Eckhart Tolle in his book The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment, which has a lot of resonance for me working with people in conflict, because sometimes, or one of the main things that you'll often see when people are in conflict, is that people looking in on the outside will say, it's obvious how they should fix this, they should just do this or just do that, why don't they just do X, Y, and Z and the whole problem will go away. And what it doesn't acknowledge when people from the outside look in on a situation and kind of think that they can see a clear way forward for other people, for those involved, is that in a sense they're not acknowledging that there's a strong aspect of holding on to an identity that we have for ourselves when we're in conflict with someone else or we've experienced a difficulty in life. So this saying, which I'll read out, very much kind of highlights that can happen. So Eckhart Tolle's description of this is: once you have identified with some form of negativity, you do not want to let it go, and on a deeply unconscious level, you do not want positive change. It would threaten your identity as a depressed, angry, or hard done by person. You will then ignore, deny, or sabotage the positive in your life. This is a common phenomenon. It's also insane. So, this kind of resonates for me quite a lot when I look at situations that I experience when I'm working with people in conflict, and also in my own experience as well. But obviously, it I'm able to observe it more when I'm working with people in mediation and conflict coaching, because I'm lucky enough to be able to, in a sense, stand outside of it while still being able to be engaged with people and try to support them in resolving their situation. But I'll go through some of it again. So once you've identified with some form of negativity, you don't want to let it go. And on a deeply unconscious level, you do not want positive change. It would threaten your identity as a depressed, angry, or hard done by person. So the thing about this is that if we see ourselves as a victim in a situation, because of something that somebody else has done, or an experience that's happened to us in one way or another, and we continually kind of portray ourselves in a sense through the kind of projector of saying that, this is who I am. I'm the person who somebody else did something bad to, and that's effectively my identity, or a large part of my identity. I'm the person who had something happen to them because of somebody else. It's almost as if we come to a place where we have the opportunity to let go of that because we can create a positive change in our life, it's almost like it feels like we're metaphorically dying, because we can't still call ourselves the person who had that bad thing happen to us, or who is in that ongoing conflict situation with the other person. And sometimes, when we have those kinds of experiences, it can be almost on a daily basis that we're talking to other people about the fact that we've got this problem with this other person, or we've got this problem situation. And so it can almost become, if we don't have that to talk about, if we don't have that to be a part of who we are, then it's like we're losing our identity. And so therefore we sabotage those possibilities for making change, because it would mean we can't continue to talk about this aspect of our lives. Now, to try to give a kind of more real example of what I mean, it can come up when I do mediations with groups of people, because obviously it's not just the two people involved in a normal mediation that I'm working with. It might be with a whole range of people. could be up to 15 people, that kind of number. And I particularly remember a group mediation I did once where I obviously can't go into too much detail about it because I can't identify who the people are, and I wouldn't want that to be a possibility from what I say. But basically, there was a group difficulty, and it was particularly initiated or centered around a dispute between two particular people, where there had been an occasion of violence between them, and there had been ongoing difficulties up to the point of that violence, and there was a wish by the kind of team leader for this situation to be resolved, because it wasn't the case that one or either of the people was going to be sacked or removed from the situation. They were wanting to support the possibility of coming back together to work together. And the two people involved were willing to try to kind of sort out their own difficulty with each other, because they both recognised what a difficult impact it had on their lives, and on their ability or wish to just turn up for work, do a day's work, and then go home without having hassle. So after a certain amount of time, this is something they wanted themselves, and they were willing to work on it. But one of the biggest challenges that they both recognised in being able to move forward was the fact that so many other people had come to expect them to spend time talking about the other person in a negative way, that there'd been such kind of a background of it always being a feature of these two people's relationships with other people they work with, that they would talk about the other person. And so it became kind of part of their daily dialogue and part of their daily identity, that they would turn up and say, oh, this, that, and the other about so and so, criticize them, abusing them, saying nasty things about them, and the other person would have the same experience. And so there was a kind of a side taking, and obviously the people talking to them about the other person would have a kind of an investment in it, because they would be perhaps egging them on to stand up to the other person or disagree with them or criticize them. So it wasn't just about the two people involved being able to resolve their difficulty and things to be forgotten about it. They then had to go outside of the mediation to then not continue to have these discussions with other people afterwards, because for them their difficulty had been resolved, but the other people had such an expectation of them identifying as someone who has a problem with the other person, that became as much of a difficulty in moving forward in the situation as just resolving the initial problem between the two people. I hope that makes sense. So what I mean is, it's not always just about the two people involved. It's what they've created for themselves as a life around the conflict situation they're dealing with that keeps their identity in place as a depressed, angry, or hard done by person, as Eckhart Tolle describes. And sometimes that pressure from outside, that in a sense they've created for themselves by making an identity out of their conflict, their difficult situation, that outside pressure is enough to keep the problem in place, because it's too much to let go of as part of their identity. It's as if it's so much part of their identity that it's harder to let go of it than it is to keep it in place, or so it would seem to them. And so they, as Eckhart Tolle says, they then ignore, deny, or sabotage the positive in their life. They don't want positive change, or they don't unconsciously they don't want positive change, because it would mean, how can they then justify to everyone all these negative things they've been saying about their life? So this is such a great statement. I'm going to go through it again because I kind of want to keep in touch with what the point of it is Once you've identified with some form of negativity, you do not want to let it go, and on a deeply unconscious level, you do not want positive change. It would threaten your identity as a depressed, angry, or hard done by person. You will then ignore, deny, or sabotage the positive in your life. This is a common phenomenon. It's also insane. And the reason he says it's insane is because if we were conscious of doing this, there's no way we would choose to keep these difficulties in place in our lives. But it's unconscious, and so we do something which is on the outside completely insane, which is why I say for a lot of people when they look in on others' conflicts, they just say, well, it's crazy they're having this conflict. Why don't they just do this and the problem will be solved? But what that viewpoint doesn't acknowledge is for the person or the people involved, it's become part of who they are. So to let go of that negativity would almost be like losing a limb or even dying, because they can't identify themselves as this person with a problem with the other person anymore. They would need to have other identities for themselves which aren't dependent on this dispute that they have with another person, or a problem that happened in their life 20 years ago that they're still holding on to and expressing as an identity for themselves, a kind of a victim identity that they have themselves. So even though in some situations people have experienced something, as I say, perhaps 20 years ago, and the situation isn't still in place, but they still hold on to that label for themselves in whatever way it shows up as a victim of something that happened. And it unconsciously is too threatening to let go of it, even though there are opportunities for positive change to happen in their lives. And so it means people stay stuck. So in a sense, what I would say is, I hope if it's made sense what I'm saying, and if not, I would certainly recommend that you find Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, and see more about why he says this. I guess my question to you, if you're kind of thinking through this, is what are the things that you see as being negative in your life that perhaps have been around for a long time? Is it that you had a very difficult relationship with someone and it broke up, or do you have a very difficult workplace situation, or do you have a very difficult family situation? And consider to what extent it's actually become a part of who you are, so you see it as a significant part of your identity. So for example, do you kind of meet up with other people who've had similar experiences and kind of talk about it as if it's kind of a shared aspect to your life that you share with them, and so you go over discussing those similar experiences with other people and kind of keep that identity for yourself in place? And while sometimes that's seen as being supportive, I would ask, to what extent does it actually simply mean you're holding on to that negativity, that you're holding on to the identity, and it's obstructing you from going forward in or away from that experience? It's obstructing you from being able to have a life that's different to the one that you're living, because you're living one which says, I am this person who's been a victim of something, and that's who I am. That's a part of who I am, and so to let go of that, to find a different way forward, is not something I can do because it's too threatening to let go of. So I'll leave you with that question, and I'm going to read through Eckhart Tolle's statement again, just so that you can kind of ponder whether this is something that is keeping a conflict for you in place, and that you're obstructing your own way forward in creating change, because it would literally be like losing a limb or even dying to the identity that you presently hold for yourself. So once you have identified with some form of negativity, you do not want to let it go, and on a deeply unconscious level you do not want positive change. It would threaten your identity as a depressed, angry or hard done by person. You will then ignore, deny or sabotage the positive in your life. This is a common phenomenon. It's also insane. So I want to emphasize that last or second to last statement. This is a common phenomenon. It is something that all of us are prone to do, but it's also something that all of us are prone to not recognizing unless we get an opportunity to stop and think this through, which is what Eckhart Tolle is giving here, and one of the many reasons I would say why he gives people such an opportunity to reflect on the difficulties in their life and perhaps recognize that those difficulties are to a large extent self-created, or self-maintained, if not necessarily self-created in the first place. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope my attempt to explain it made sense. It's definitely something I observe in people who are involved in conflict, who do hold on to the difficulty of the conflict and find it hard to move forward because it's become part of their identity, as I say, whether in a family difficulty or a workplace difficulty, and sometimes, or just as often perhaps, in partnerships with their intimate partner. It can be a thing that is, or ex-partner, I guess, more frequently. It's become a thing which has become very stuck, and so people have perhaps sabotaged opportunities for positive change. Please let me know what you think. Please let me know if you've had a recognition of that in your own life. Please let me know if you think it's a load of rubbish what I've just said. If you think with any of the contemplations there'd be something that other people would be interested in, please share them with other people. Please add them to your playlists, and like the video in this case, or podcast, because I'll also be putting this out on a podcast on Anchor, and also subscribe to YouTube or on Anchor to this content, Contemplations on Conflict. And I hope to see you next time for the next one. Thanks very much for listening. Bye bye.